Howdy y'all, welcome back, thank you for being here. Central Park in New York City is the most visited park in the United States, with an estimated 42 million walking these immaculate grounds per year. Yet, at the core of one of the most popular tourist attractions in the world lies a much darker history which is seldom discussed in modern academia. A history chock full of truly incomprehensible details which, as we will see today, lend themselves to a rather large mystery that seems to be directly associated with the old world. Again, take everything we discuss today with a grain of salt, but we will attempt to peel back the veil to expose the true nature of this lavish creation which reshaped Manhattan. Throughout the video, we will also be examining the oldest known photographs of Central Park, with the majority taken in the years directly after the park first opened. Many of these images will be of the stereoscopic or old world 3D variety, and I will include the title and date for each image if it isn't already included on the photograph. So let's begin. Between 1821 and 1855, a crucial point in American history, we're told the population of New York City quadrupled. Earlier, in 1811, the Commissioner's Plan of 1811 was enacted, which called for the vast reconstruction and renovation of New York City to adhere to a new street plan. This plan did not call for a Central Park, however. Here is where we must begin to read between the lines. By the early 1840s, New York City's elite called for the construction of a massive new park in Manhattan. The plan was spearheaded by William Cullen Bryant, the editor of the New York Evening Post. By 1851, Mayor Ambrose Kingsland addressed the New York City Common Council, setting forth the necessity for the park, which was then referred to the council's Committee of Lands, who quickly approved the proposal. The committee chose a tract of land known as Jones's Woods. Jones's Woods was originally known as the Louvre Farm, being considered one of the wealthiest pieces of farmland in New York City, owned by the Provost family, who had originally settled in New York when it was New Netherland. David Provost, the patriarch to the family line, was said to have been buried in Jones's Woods in an elaborate underground mausoleum, which in appearance is very similar to some of the more advanced burial mounds that I've discussed in previous videos. The farmhouse of Jones's Woods survived a great fire, which was said to have destroyed much of the woods in 1894. This fire seemed to coincide with the founding of the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, now Rockefeller University, on the land. Today, what remains of Jones's Woods is largely occupied by the Rockefeller University, and the original farmhouse was demolished around the year 1911. Tying this back to Central Park, essentially, a bill was signed by the government of New York to confiscate the farm of Jones's Woods and to create Central Park. However, this bill was eventually deemed to be unconstitutional and it was withdrawn. So instead, the Committee of Lands shifted their focus to the massive tract of land which directly surrounded the Croton Aqueduct. The Croton Aqueduct and its collecting reservoir, built from 1837 through 1842, was said to be the nation's first great aqueduct, and it carried water over 41 miles from Westchester County to Manhattan using only gravity. Originally, before the aqueduct, the wealthy residents of Manhattan had their fresh water delivered to them by horse and carriage through a company known as the Manhattan Company. However, the Manhattan Company quickly began to venture into banking, eventually becoming Chase Manhattan, today known as Chase Morgan, one of the largest banks in America. When the Manhattan Company began to neglect their duties to deliver clean water, the wealthy citizens banded together to demand a new, more reliable system to access fresh water, and thus, the Croton Aqueduct was born. In 1833, Manhattan was surveyed by Major David Bates Douglas, who was the engineering professor of West Point Academy. By 1837, the plan was laid for what is described as the largest single engineering project up until that point in New York's history. Interestingly, like other major projects throughout history, we're told Douglas left the project shortly before construction began and was replaced by John B. Jervis. The aqueduct dropped by 13 inches every mile and was one of the first instances of the usage of hydraulic cement in a major construction project in America. The iron piping was laid for over 40 miles, completely encased in red brick masonry, with large, conical red brick towers constructed just about every mile. The receiving reservoir was one of the most mysterious and lavish pieces of Old World style architecture ever founded on American soil. Measuring over 1,800 feet long and over 800 feet wide, the Croton Reservoir was built in the style of an Egyptian fortress, with a full Egyptian facade complete with hieroglyphs. The walls, over 25 feet thick, held back a reserve of over 150 million gallons of water, and the structure supplied the fresh water to the entire city of New York for a majority of the 19th century. The sources seem to vary on the overall size, but official reports claim the structure covered 35 acres of land. It was the Croton Aqueduct's president, Nicholas Dean, who actually proposed creating Central Park based around the massive Egyptian-style reservoir. It's almost as if Dean had a reason to want to clear the landscape around the reservoir, and his ulterior motives are very easily discernible today. In 1853, New York officially passed the Central Park Act, authorizing the purchase of the land that today makes up the park. By 1855, the park was surveyed to contain over 34,000 plots of land, many of them said to be owned by African American communities. Proposals quickly swept through New York to downsize the park plan to accommodate these communities, but this plan to downsize was vetoed by New York's mayor, Fernando Wood. The majority of the residents of the park lived in the communities of Seneca Village, Pigtown, and most interestingly, we're told many Irish, Indigenous, and African orphans resided within the grounds of Mount St. Vincent's Academy, which was also nearby the Croton Aqueduct. By 1855, a report was released which claimed over 1,600 residents would need to be evicted from their land to construct Central Park. However, today, it is believed that number is drastically low compared to the actual number of residents that were forcibly removed. We also have numerous reports from that time stating that Seneca Village was actually a rather prominent and affluent community at that time, and not the low-income community it was made out to be in the media in the years that followed. Either way, using eminent domain, New York City controversially removed all the residents who lived directly around the Croton Egyptian-style aqueduct and began reshaping the landscape for Central Park. Another astounding fact given here is that we are told originally Central Park was approved at a cost of $1.7 million, which is an outlandishly high sum for the mid-19th century. But it becomes even more apparent that something more was happening here, as the actual final cost of Central Park soared to over $7.3 million, more than the price that the United States would pay for Alaska just a few years later. To repeat, creating Central Park, removing the communities that surrounded the Croton Reservoir, and then simply reshaping the landscape into the park cost New York City more money then the entire United States itself paid for the state of Alaska. By June 1856, New York Mayor Wood hired famed author Washington Irving to curb public opinion and inspire confidence. The park board then hired Frederick Law Olmsted after a design competition, and Central Park was said to have been designed to incorporate the natural formations of the landscape, as opposed to more formal parks of the time, which tended to use symmetry. Again, this all seems to lend to the idea that the design of the park should be cheaper, not more expensive. Here is where we have to get to some real important questions. If you're incorporating the natural formations rather than reshaping the entire landscape, why would the creation of Central Park have been so dangerously expensive? Could it have been the removal was happening of a significant amount of history that already existed on this land? Diving into these details, we're told more gunpowder was used to clear Central Park than was used on both sides in the entire Battle of Gettysburg, the largest battle of the Civil War. We're also told the entire landscape of Central Park, all of the land surrounding the Croton Reservoir, was essentially removed. Every bit of the topsoil, over 18,500 cubic yards of it, was removed, and new soil was said to have been shipped in from Long Island and New Jersey. Did they remove the entire top layer of earth in Central Park for a reason? In the narrative today, we're told this was done because the soil that existed in the park was not fertile enough for growth. But we can also entertain theories that appear to make more sense. Ancient burial mounds, known to be littered throughout New York. Ancient earthworks existing on the land. Could there have been evidence of a previous culture, possibly one that was advanced? Evidence of foundations, evidence of infrastructure that could be associated with the indigenous, the African, the Irish cultures that were being ostracized from the land at this time? These are all possible alternate theories to why all of the soil of Central Park was removed and new soil was shipped in before the park opened. When the American Civil War began in 1861, the Central Park Commissioners decided to continue building Central Park, since significant parts of the park had, quote, already been finished. By late 1861, the park south of 72nd Street had been completed, except for the fences. By 1867, Central Park accommodated nearly 3 million pedestrians, over 85,000 horses, and 1.38 million vehicles annually. And by 1870, we're told, Central Park was in the control of the Tamony political machine, which dominated New York and later nationwide politics. Again, if you don't know, Tamony societies are tied back to secret orders who seem to reserve the right to hide or expose the true history of America and the indigenous people. The Croton Aqueduct and the Reservoir, built as one of the largest Egyptian revival pieces of architecture in American history, sits on land that was directly occupied by ostracized groups of Irish, indigenous, and African Americans, many of which were theorized to be rather affluent and important, including those who lived within Seneca Village. All of the land was then said to have been cleared through eminent domain, quite literally down to the soil itself being removed, and the entirety of the landscape surrounding the Croton was reshaped to fit a new narrative. We're told the park declined in attendance and was not well maintained through the end of the 19th and early 20th centuries. However, after World War I, a renewed interest arose for the leisurely activity of Central Park, and through multiple renovation projects, the popularity of the park soared again, continuing to rise to the levels of engagement that we see today. The original Egyptian Croton Reservoir only stood for roughly 50 years, being demolished in the 1890s, which is fascinating given it was not only a key piece of history, a miraculously designed building of immense proportions, but it was also the centerpiece for Central Park, and the key reason, we're told, that the park was founded in this location. And yet, with the loss of the Croton Reservoir and the overgrowth of the park, which took place during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we can truly see how the history of this landscape was allowed to let fester for the ushering in of a new narrative. It is through our research into the anomalies of history, like Central Park, that we are able to truly gain a glimpse into the lost history that has shaped our realm. And I believe there is entirely more to the history of Central Park than the current narrative has given it credit for. And I truly can't wait to get into this deeper discussion with you on the subject in the comments down below. I can't wait to hear what you have to say, and we will talk about this more on the next video.